This Week in Virology, the podcast about viruses, the kind that make you sick. Hello, CSV. Yeah! All right. From Microbe TV, this is TWiV, This Week in Virology. This is episode 499. Today is June 15th, 2018. I'm Vincent Racaniello, and you are listening to the podcast all about viruses. Today we are recording in Halifax, Nova Scotia. We are at the 2018 meeting of the Canadian Society for Virology, and it's being held at Dalhousie University. And joining me today, one of the regular TWiV hosts from Western Massachusetts, Alan Dove.
Good to be here.
How's it going in Halifax?
It's a cool day in Halifax. So it's right now it's 13 C. That's 56 Fahrenheit. I'm sorry for using Fahrenheit, but you know, hopefully the Mounties won't come in and charge me for that. And it's been kind of cloudy a lot of the time, but apparently it's going to clear up today, and they're going to march everybody to a fort and show them that.
All right, I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah.
So this is the third TWiV in Canada, just the third one. Number 235 was in Edmonton. That was a special meeting there. And number 346 was at Western University, where there was a American Society for Virology meeting. So this is number 3. How many of you are TWiV listeners, by the way? Raise your hand. Pretty good audience.
We're big in Canada.
We should get bigger. You should have more TWiVs in Canada. I want to point out we have 4 guests that we're going to bring on in groups because we don't have enough room for everyone at once. And before we do that, I just wanted to say a few things. One thing I noticed about this meeting is that there's a lot of enthusiasm in the talks. People describe their data. This is really cool. This is awesome. This is amazing. And, you know, we don't really see that at ASV. People are pretty formal, so I like that. So keep it up.
Yeah.
Okay. The other thing that I think is cool is this USB chain with the abstracts on it, which also happens to be a beer bottle opener.
Yes.
Right?
It could be used for bottles other than beer, but I think the intent is beer.
The intent is beer. This is great. I haven't tried it yet. Hopefully it'll hold up. So thank you for that. That's really good. Finally, as you see, we have some T-shirts here, some TWiV T-shirts. We have 5 of them we're going to throw out at the end. All right? So if you want one, you have to stick around. You can't leave. And we'll have more at ASV if you go to that. And if you don't get one, you can always buy one. You go to cafepress.com/TWiV. All right.
And if that doesn't go well, next time we'll throw out coffee mugs.
Yeah, that would be dangerous, wouldn't it?
It'd be interesting for us, though.
Once we threw out
microbes.
Plushy toys.
Plush microbes, yeah. I think I broke somebody's nose with
it. We hit people with the cardboard. Yeah, it has to be soft.
It was a rhinovirus, so it was okay.
All right, our first guests are from the University of Montreal and Dalhousie University. Please welcome Nathalie Grandvaux and Craig McCormick. Thank you for joining us, Craig and Nathalie. Pull up to those mics, get cozy so the room can hear you. Thank you very much. And we would like to start by asking both of you why you are co-founders of Canadian Society for Virology. Why did you found this society, Nathalie? Tell us.
Well, first, thanks for hosting us. So the society is born because of, I think, two criteria. We'll start with the first and let Craig tell you about the other one. So Canada has been, we have had great scientists making a lot of achievement in virology, either basic, clinical, or epidemiology. But some of these people have been great leaders, like those who are at the Lee Katching Institute for Virology in Edmonton that you visited a few years ago. But we really never had a structure to help strengthen the community and discuss together. So we actually, Craig and I met at the Canadian Society for Microbiology meeting in 2011 in Newfoundland, and the meeting was organized by Andrew Lang, who is somewhere in the audience today. And we actually, virology was restricted to one little session, which where it was a full room, like it was well attended, but at the end we were just wondering, like, we have so many more virologists in Canada, but where are they? So we didn't have a chance to meet them, and obviously they go to meetings like ASV or other specific viruses meetings. So we started to think about CSV at this time, basically, and yeah.
Any other thoughts, Craig?
So after that, so Canada has a funding agency called CIHR that is analogous to the NIH, so shortly after that meeting that Nathalie and I met each other at, so CIHR started reforming some of its the way it does its business, and actually rather dramatically and rather quickly. And so they did away with face-to-face peer review, which is considered the gold standard for peer review, and they changed the way that their funding scheme was structured, to the detriment of a lot of early career researchers and mid-career researchers. So that all happened really fast, and we noticed how difficult it was becoming for researchers, basic scientists especially across Canada, to establish their new research labs. It was an especially bad time to start a lab over the last 5 years, and virologists included. And so desperate times call for desperate measures. We really wanted to develop the society so that we could help these researchers launch their new labs, and provide additional training opportunities for trainees, and make sure that that the funding agencies and government hear from us with a strong voice.
So you wanted both a lobbying agency and a place to meet to talk?
Yeah, both. Yeah, absolutely.
So the meeting was an integral part of it, obviously, not just having a society so people could meet, right?
Yes.
And the first one was, as you said, at ASV. So this is the second meeting now.
Yeah, the first one was actually a satellite of ASV in Virginia. So we have for that to thank Grant McFadden, who was the president of ASV at the time, and who is a Canadian scientist too. And he really pushed us to start with this meeting. And actually, we have to acknowledge that if we are here today, it's because he really gave us a push, and he was really excited about the idea of CSV. So we had a full day of presentation. We had 75 attendees in Virginia. So it was, and we received this message from the community that really they wanted a meeting in Canada, and that we have our own meetings and meet all together. So,
and you're going to do this every 2 years?
So that's the current plan is every 2 years. So now we're having discussions about where future meetings are going to happen. We're also planning on being opportunistic. So what we want to do is create partnerships with other societies. So, for example, I understand that ASB is coming north of the border in a few years again, and so it makes sense to partner with ASB on a future event. And other societies, same thing. For example, the Canadian Society for Microbiology. This meeting that we mentioned where Nathalie and I first met, I think that would be another wonderful partnership that we should take advantage of.
So whereas ASV split off from ASM, that was a fission, and you're looking at more of a fusion event, maybe.
Well, we're Canadian.
Sounds dangerous, right? So you will partner when it makes geographic sense, right? Because you don't want to travel to Arizona to do a Canadian Society for Virology meeting, right?
Yeah, exactly right. So we have so Canada has the population of California, but stretched out over a very thin line, just sort of north of the 49th parallel. And so it's really important for us to move this meeting around in Canada, so to the west and to central Canada, so that we get broad representation and buy-in.
How many members of CSV do you have? How many are at this meeting?
At this meeting, actually, 95% of the people in this room are members of CSV. So we have currently 195 members. We just started collecting membership in December, so it went really well. And in here we have 174 attendees, and only a few are not members.
Is that more or less what you expected, or did you hope for more, Craig?
It actually exceeded our initial expectations. So, keeping in mind we're about 1/10 of the U.S. population, so think about how big ASV is. I think we're punching above our weight at this stage, but we want to work hard to continue to recruit, especially trained doctors.
The ASV, the most we get is 1,600 virologists, so you're doing pretty well. Do you have any sense about how many Canadian virologists there are?
Well, we got this question the other day. Still don't have the answer to that, but the initial list that we had of people who were interested to CSV was 300. And, well, personally, I know, and I had a lot of people telling me that they know other virologists who are not here and we are not CSV member, and sometimes never heard about us. So I think there is expansion, but I don't know how many people are at the Liège Institute for Virology. Just that, it's probably 300 people.
I think maybe this is the process by which we find out. We're gonna host the best meetings possible that are. We want these to be can't miss meetings, and maybe this is how we flesh out the entire community.
Yeah. This came up on TWiV a few weeks ago. How many virologists are there in the world? Who knows? In the U.S., we don't know. But you're smaller. Maybe you could get a handle on it, right? So do you have to be Canadian to come to this meeting?
No.
No.
No. How many people are not Canadian in the room? Okay. So.
How many people do not work in Canada? Yeah? Couple, yeah.
So we have some people from Heidelberg. We have people from
Texas.
Somebody
from Mount Sinai.
Mount Sinai.
Yeah.
Sure.
One thing that we noticed, because so Canadians are awfully good at going elsewhere and getting trained and coming back. So one thing that we've noticed is that this is a nice way for expat Canadians to make themselves known to potentially future employers. Right. Yeah.
So we have a lot of virus meetings. We have ASV, plus strand, minus strand, double-stranded RNA, all the DNA virus meetings, the retrovirus, International Congress. Do we need another virology meeting, Nathalie?
Yes, of course. well, we do, because to my opinion, we need to learn from other viruses. If I go to a meeting where everybody is working on the same type of viruses that I worked, it's interesting and it's going very well in deep, in the biology of this particular virus. But I need to learn from the other viruses. That's where we can exchange and get new ideas. Otherwise, I think the fields are going all in the same direction. So we need to talk to each other.
Actually, we got a nice. So everybody in the room got a nice compliment today. One person. We arranged for a complimentary registration for the university biosafety officer, and so across Canada they've got a new association. Everyone's got a biosafety officer. Wouldn't they benefit from coming to a meeting like this? The biosafety officer, she's been enjoying the meeting. She said she thought that some of the science would be over her head, but everyone did a really good job of introducing the virus that they worked on and the basics, and so she was following along very, very well. So I think that's something we'd like to continue.
Yeah. Now, part of the impetus for creating CSV was this situation with your funding agency, and presumably there was politics behind that. How has that evolved, or have you been involved with that, or are you about to get involved with that?
Well, I have been quite involved last year with, but we didn't talk to our member at this time because we had our first business meeting in here. So I didn't want to be the voice of CSV. I spoke for myself, but that's the plan. And I think for that, we as we discussed, we will probably associate with other Canadian associations like the CSMB, who is doing. These people are doing fantastic work, lobbying to the government for funding. So that's the plan. The situation has improved a little bit, but there is still a lot to do. So.
They basically took the piggy bank and dropped it off the high shelf, and it's partially pasted back together, but we're not all the way back.
Okay.
All right, we have one more question, and that is, are you going to establish a governance for the society so that you don't have to do every meeting from now on, for example?
Craig, I let you answer that.
That is the plan. I mean, we want there to, looking around the room, there's a lot of, especially early career and mid-career researchers, I think, that have expressed interest and have lots of abilities. They have a great deal invested in the success of the society and improved access to funding and trainee opportunities. So I think getting other people involved will be no problem.
Yeah, that will be done soon, before the fall. That's the plan.
Yeah, you have good models to copy, right, ASV? The board, president, secretary, treasurer, counselors for different areas to help you build the program directors, all of that. So ASV is a great model.
Yeah, that's exactly the model we're going into.
And it really distributes the work, having worked with them for a number of years. And you don't know where the next meeting is yet, right? It hasn't been planned?
Not yet. We have one proposition. We're looking for the ones, and we will figure that out during the summer. Yeah.
All right. Well, Nathalie and Craig, good luck with the rest of the meeting. I'm impressed. You've done a great job. And thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good to set that there.
Our next guest is from Bloomberg, Johns Hopkins School of Public Health. Please welcome Kate O'Brien. Thanks for joining us.
I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. I'd like to start out with learning a little bit about your training. I think you're originally from Canada, is that correct?
Yeah, I'm Canadian through and through. My family's been here since the 1600s. I'm apart from Indigenous people, I'm pretty Canadian as you get. I went to University of Toronto for undergraduate. I was a chemistry major. In fact, I was an organic chemistry major.
Cool.
And then some people think that's cool.
Organic chemistry is awesome.
Not all people think that's very cool. And I went to medical school at McCormick University.
So at what point in your life did you decide you wanted to go to medical school?
Oh, really late in my undergraduate career. I had sort of a crisis of direction, probably in my fourth year of university. I never intended to go to medical school, and I have to admit I was a really reluctant attendee, but it worked out pretty well for me.
And then in medical school, when did you get interested in clinical research of the sort you told us about yesterday? Because you could have been a physician and take care of patients, but you've done a lot more than that, right?
Yeah, actually, I had a great opportunity in medical school that sort of fell in my lap a little bit. There's a famous Canadian, Terry Fox, who died of cancer and was a great person who raised the awareness of cancer and raised huge amounts of money. And there was a scholarship for medical students to do epidemiology. I think nobody in our class knew what the heck epidemiology was. So I had an opportunity to work on cancer-related epidemiology, and that really turned me on to the idea of having, impact beyond one patient at a time.
Great. Now, yesterday at this meeting, you told us about perch, which is not a fish, right?
Well, perch is a fish. It's just not. It's not the perch I was talking about.
Is there some law that medical studies have to have some cute little acronym?
Yes, that is a law.
I thought
yes,
so.
Yes, it's definitely a law, and we like, as a Canadian, I like to be law abiding, so that's why we had
course,
that.
Right.
Do you like to fish?
Yeah, I love perch. Yeah, you might be in Nova Scotia. Anyway.
All right, so tell us a little bit about perch. What are the goals? What are the study designs, and so forth?
Yeah, pneumonia is the leading cause of death among children around the world. Of course, we don't see deaths largely in high-income countries, but in low-income countries, it's the number one cause of death. And so PERCH is a study to try and figure out what the causes of pneumonia are in children in low-income countries in a contemporary era. And what we mean by that is an era where we have HIV, we have urbanization of populations. We're largely using vaccines against the two major bacterial pathogens. And the question now is that the evidence base for pneumonia etiology is really based on data that comes from 20, 30, 40 years ago. So we've had lots and lots of changes, both from, we have new pathogens that have been identified that just weren't possible to test for in those earlier studies. So there was a really significant investment made by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to try to establish a new evidence base on which we would ground studies for the future around vaccine development, treatment and triage algorithms, treatment methodologies, so that we're using our dollars for research in a way that is directed towards pathogens that are most relevant.
Now, as you were talking about yesterday, this was a huge effort to figure out because of the diversity of situations that this is occurring in and the infrastructure involved. And you're talking about $40 million in, what was it, 6 years to figure out and parse out what are now the leading causes of pneumonia in kids, right?
Yeah, pneumonia is a really challenging area to work in. I think, as I mentioned yesterday, if you want a relatively straightforward career, you can work in diarrhea because at least you know who has the disease and you can get a sample from the site of infection.
Right.
And neither of those things are true for pneumonia. And because of that, this field of pneumonia research has really been plagued forever with those issues as we start to commingle patients who do and don't have pneumonia in our analyses, and we can't get a specimen from the place where the infection actually is. So we really have this struggle to be learning about the site of infection based on other body fluids and other parts of the body that are infected, assuming that identification of a pathogen in the blood or in the nose is somehow giving us information about what's really sitting in the lung.
Right. And one of the things that ultimately came out of that was this finding that was certainly news to me, that RSV is apparently kind of a big deal in pneumonia, right?
Yeah, it's a really big deal. So in our study, which was of 7 countries, it was 9 sites in 7 countries, in 7 in Africa, 2 in South Asia. The leading pathogen in every site among children who were hospitalized for pneumonia was RSV, and it was the leading pathogen by a lot. And yet this is a pathogen, so I think that's partly why we're talking about this. It's a virus we don't really have. We certainly don't have a vaccine against RSV yet. And ways of preventing RSV and of treating RSV are really around supportive treatment for children who are having a serious event from RSV. We do have some prevention for RSV in the form of monoclonal antibodies, but the ability to deliver them and the cost of those is prohibitive for actually doing something for most of the kids who most need that kind of prevention.
Right. So it looks like we've dealt with or are in the process of dealing with pneumococcus and Hib, and now we're down to what's the next top pathogen?
We've really picked the low-hanging fruit, and we just had a report come out on Tuesday that kind of hit the news that in the past 15 years there have been 1.45 million deaths among children that have been saved as a result of Hib vaccine and pneumococcal vaccine. So huge advances in the bacterial side of things, not really playing that game yet for the viral pathogens. So that's definitely sort of the area that things are heading in, and RSV is the top player there.
So this was based on sequence analysis of specimens that you collected, right? This identification. Besides RSV, what were the other top hits? Tell us.
Yeah, parainfluenza was if we're talking about the other viral pathogens, parainfluenza, human metapneumovirus, and rhinovirus were the other top ones. And then along with pneumococcus, those 5 were the top pathogens.
Were those findings surprising to you?
I think what we were surprised about, we weren't surprised that in some of the sites RSV was going to be a leading pathogen. I think what was surprising to us was how consistent the findings were across the sites. Mm-hmm. It is true that one site or another had maybe the third one was the second most common or the fourth most common, so it's not exactly the same rank order of every pathogen. But what we didn't find is that there are big heterogeneities across geographies. I think that was what was surprising to us, and that's good news for the purpose of product development, is that we're not really talking about regional vaccines here. The pathogens that are important, they're kind of important everywhere, so that's good for product development.
If you did this study in Canada, the US, would you expect to find similar findings?
So there has been a study done in the U.S. called EPIC. It was a study of both adults and children around pneumonia etiology. They weren't able to do quite the level of testing or the level of analysis that we were able to do in Perch, largely because of study design. But RSV is also the leading pathogen. So I think we just need a lot more attention on RSV, and we hope there are some advances that are going to kind of break through the efficacy pathway pretty soon.
Do you think this gives some impetus into these developments? Because maybe before this, people thought, it's not a big deal, right? But now maybe it'll push more vaccine and monoclonal development. Yeah,
for sure. On the RSV side, certainly in high-income countries, this is the next low-hanging fruit, along with influenza. I mean, I think preparation for a pandemic is the other area that's really critical. But RSV for sure, and it's not just the children who presently were preventing RSV through palivizumab, it's children who are not at, quote, high risk for RSV. But, there are lots and lots of infants who get admitted with RSV, and ask any clinician who has to weather through RSV season in the Northern Hemisphere. Yeah. What we also find in the Southern Hemisphere is that there are lots of deaths from RSV that happen in the community. Nobody knows that they're as a result of RSV, but when a child dies at home, there's more evidence coming out that a lot of those are from RSV.
I have to tell a personal story. Our youngest son was diagnosed at less than a year of age with RSV. It was tough just getting the specimen for the diagnosis. I think they had to try 3 or 4 times, and he wasn't too happy. And then it was pretty scary. But in these countries where you did this study, you can't go back and say this allows us to treat with a monoclonal. It's simply too expensive, right?
Well, I think we just have to be careful. Right now, it's too expensive. First of all, the monoclonal we have has to be given monthly. There's just no way that that's ever going to be a feasible delivery strategy. The cost side of things, I think we just have to be really careful. There are mechanisms for market shaping, and there are mechanisms for funding commodities like vaccines, whether they're monoclonals or whether they're active vaccines for low-income countries, and that has been hugely successful. I think we're here at a Canadian meeting. I think we should be really proud to recognize Canada's contribution to the Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunization, which provides vaccines for low-income countries. And Canada has funded Gavi at over $1 billion, with a B, over $1 billion. And those have been life-saving interventions for millions of children around the world in low-income countries. And that's definitely an effort that has to be continued and has been one of the most successful public health interventions.
Can you give us an update on development of RSV vaccines? I know there have been problems in the past, in the 60s, there were some issues. Can we expect some at some point in the near future?
The horizon looks really bright on that side. We're not there yet, but there are really 3 strategies that are being pursued right now, and there's a very active pipeline of RSV vaccine research that's making its way relatively quickly into advanced stage trials. There are really 3 strategies. The first strategy is recognizing the epidemiology of RSV, which is it's really, really about kids who are under 6 months of age when you're talking about mortality. And so the approach there is to immunize pregnant women in the 3rd trimester of pregnancy to induce high concentrations of RSV-specific antibody that would cross the placenta and passively protect those children from birth, and through their early months of life. The second strategy is to use monoclonals that could be long-acting monoclonals, and that there are products now that are in advanced stage trials. So the idea there would be to deliver a monoclonal at the time of birth or soon thereafter that would see protection of that child passively out through, again, 4 or 5 months of age. And the third strategy would be an active RSV vaccine, so a live attenuated vaccine, given to infants. But the challenge there is inducing immunity early enough in life that you get at that high burden of disease. Yes. And that's pretty tough to do. So I think most people are thinking about a passive-active vaccination strategy, that somehow you deliver passive vaccine either through maternal immunization or the monoclonal, and then follow up with the infant vaccine. Yeah.
Now, you've also looked at the impact of vaccines in general. The impact of vaccines on public health, which is a long-standing interest of the show, and I'm sure most of the people in the room. What have you found?
Well, first of all, who doesn't love that,
Yeah.
right? Like, I'm glad the show focuses on that. I mean, this is the we have such a privilege doing the kind of work that we all do, which is there aren't that many fields where you get to go to work each day and know that you're saving, millions of lives, actually, which is, it's not an overstatement, it's true. So yeah, I work a lot on, I work in the field of vaccine public health, and the advances that have been made, the number of children whose lives have been saved as a result, not just of vaccines, but that is probably the best buy in public health. We have quantitative analyses that show that for every dollar invested in a package of vaccines, you accrue somewhere between $16 and $44 return on investment. There's pretty much no other investment you can make that has that kind of return. So I think we really have to be behind and pushing the vaccine approach, because it works. And vaccines work, and they save lives, and they advance the health both of families and communities. So I work really all over the world, trying to help countries and communities understand vaccines, understand what the best policies might be in the local setting, and then how to actually quantify what is happening when we deliver vaccines in routine programs, and how to get all of those vaccines to every child who needs them on time and fully vaccinated.
And putting those kinds of numbers on it obviously makes it a much better sell to politicians who are trying to figure out whether to, build a new soccer stadium or fund a vaccination campaign.
Yeah, it's not just ministers of health that make these decisions. It's
right.
Ministers of finance who make these decisions. That's actually where the juice is. And I think we all know that, it's really where he who has the money pays, is the one
calls the tune. Yes.
Calls the tune, exactly. So I think as scientists and as people who understand numbers and understand the power of quantifying something, those are numbers that really speak to decision makers. We've gone from almost 13 million deaths among children under 5 in the 1990s. We're now down to under 6 million children who die each year under 5. And a large fraction of those are preventable deaths. So that's the work that I feel really committed to, and doing work that actually has impact in people's lives today, tomorrow, and in the future.
Maybe you could comment on this apparent paradox. Many countries in the world want vaccines. They can't afford them. We're trying to figure out how to get them to them. And in the U.S. and maybe also in Canada, a certain number of people don't want them. And they can afford them anyway. What can we do about that?
Really, it's about information. I think we all have the privilege living in Canada and the United States that we largely live in an environment that is relatively free of vaccine-preventable diseases. But I say relatively because they're not gone. And microbes don't recognize geopolitical borders. I think all we have to do is look at very recent experiences that when individual families and communities do not vaccinate their children, those pathogens are fighting for their lives, and they are there ready to come back with a force. I think most probably relevant evidence of that was the measles outbreak in Disneyland. This past season of influenza was a terrible season. There were more children who died in the U.S. from influenza that have died in a long time, and most of those children were otherwise healthy children. It's not just children who have underlying illnesses. And many of them were not vaccinated. So I think we have to be serious about vaccines. We live in a world where people can get on a plane at 1 hour of a day and be somewhere else very, very far away in 12 hours. And they bring with them all of the exposures that they've had. So there are very sound reasons for the success that we've had in promoting health, and we have the benefit of having quite high assurity that our children will survive through childhood, which was not true years ago.
We recently did a TWiV with a vaccine expert from University of Washington, and he lamented the amount of exemptions that we have in the U.S. Medical exemptions, which are far higher than the 1% that we might expect. And one of his solutions was to try and move away from needles towards more benign vaccination procedures like microneedle patches. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, boy, we all want those microneedle patches. It would be, these are, for the listeners, if you've not seen one of these, it basically looks like a Band-Aid. And it's got little tiny prongs in it that you don't even really feel when you put it on the skin. So you're kind of delivering the vaccine just into the upper level of the skin, which is a great immunologic organ that we don't take enough advantage of. My personal experience, I'm a pediatrician, and my personal experience is it's not really about the needles. I mean, yeah, that would be great. We all want to practice healthcare in a way that is pain-free, and we should pay a lot of attention to that. But I think it's really more about people have such access to information now, and so much of it is wrong. So much of it is just inaccurate, incorrect information. And I think we have an obligation to share accurate information and really encourage people to go to credible, reliable sources of information as opposed to, the information you might get from your neighbor 2 doors down.
Mm-hmm. All right, I have one more question. This physician, whose name escapes me, suggested making it easier to get vaccinated than to get an exemption. And one of his suggestions was have it done at school. Yeah. What do you think about that?
There are lots of countries that vaccinate in different places, not just going to your physician to get a vaccine. For sure in the U.S., but I think now in parts of Canada, you can get an influenza vaccine by just going to the pharmacy. Those are really sensible things to do. So I'm really in favor of reducing any barrier that there is to families adequately accessing vaccines in a really timely and simple way. The one thing we do give up when you're getting vaccines in places other than from your healthcare provider is we do a lot more at vaccine visits than just give a vaccine, and so we just want to make sure that we're not sort of inadvertently creating a deficiency there. Also, we do a lot of growth monitoring, a lot of anticipatory guidance about safety issues around kids, their growth and resilience and feeding and things like that. So I think it's a bit of there's risk and benefit to doing that, but I'm fully in favor of vaccinating wherever and whenever is most convenient for people.
Well, Kate O'Brien, thanks so much for joining us. Let's give her a hand. All right, our last guest for this TWiV is a postdoctoral fellow with David Evans at the University of Alberta. Please welcome Ryan Noyce. Hi, Ryan.
Hi, how are you?
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Tell us a little bit about your history. Where are you from?
So I am from Southern Ontario, just east of Toronto in a place called Oshawa. And I started my...
That's south of the state of Michigan, I think.
And I started my undergrad degree at the University of Guelph in the microbiology department there, doing a cooperative education program. And I had access to a number of amazing opportunities, and one of those was in a virology lab. And I quickly decided I would move a little bit south of Guelph to Hamilton, and I did a PhD in Karen Mossman's lab at McMaster University, where I worked on, how envelope virus particles can trigger the immune response and the antiviral immune response. And then after that, I was really interested kind of in the entry of viruses, and I moved actually to Dalhousie. So I did a postdoc here with Chris Richardson, and we looked at identifying the elusive epithelial exit receptor, Nectin-4. And I was here for about 5 years, and then for family reasons, I moved with my wife and 2 kids out to Edmonton, where there's another hotbed of virology going on at the University of Alberta, at the Li Ka-shing Institute, and I'm an RA, a research associate in Dr. David Evans' lab there.
So I misattributed to you to a postdoc, so you're a research associate.
I'm a research associate.
Okay. He's a research associate.
He's a research associate.
At the university.
We'd like to welcome our final guest, this research associate.
Now, Ryan, we talked about your paper on the recovery of infectious horsepox virus on TWiV. You remember?
Yes,
that,
very
Alan?
cool paper.
Yeah, we actually did two almost. We had the original episode, and then I think you wrote us, and we followed up on the next episode. Let's get the story directly from you. You're the first author on the PLOS One paper. Why did you do this in the first place? Why did you want to recover the virus?
Well, there are a number of, I guess, reasons why we wanted to do it. The first one was David's lab has had a long-standing history of figuring out kind of the evolution of Vaccinia virus, the virus that was used to eradicate smallpox. And there's more recent phylogenetic evidence to suggest that it is not necessary. It's not a cowpox. Edward Jenner did not use a cowpox, and that possibly it could be more of a horsepox-like virus. And the other flip side of that is that we do a lot of recombination work in David's lab. So he's a DNA replication and recombination expert. And he had shown many years ago that you could kind of stitch pieces of Vaccinia virus DNA together as long as they had overlapping pieces of homology. And we thought we could maybe use this as a tool to develop more complicated poxvirus vectors, because I think one of the things that is limited in making better oncolytics or oncolytic viruses or better therapeutics is that we can't put as many things as we want into them. And we thought that we might try to use synthetic biology as an approach to create more complicated vectors.
Now, horsepox, one of the things that stood out to me is this is a virus that appears to have been accidentally eradicated, right?
Yes.
Which is just kind of a baffling notion. That there used to be outbreaks of this, and then there weren't, and everybody kind of didn't notice that it had vanished.
That's very true. So there's actually only one sequence in the GenBank, the NCBI database from 1976 outbreak in Mongolia. And that is a mystery that, as pox virologists, we often wonder why that is.
Where did it go?
Exactly.
Yeah.
There are a number of people that believe that it is still out there and that it's just dormant, and we don't know what the natural reservoir is.
Reservoir host.
Yeah. There is there's a number of cowpox strains, and there's a lot of misnomers as far as how pox virologists have started naming pox viruses. And so, all cowpox viruses are basically rodent viruses. I didn't talk about this today, but we have some data to suggest that actually this strain of horsepox doesn't really replicate well in rodent cells. And so I don't know if that is a potential reason why it may have gone dormant or has lost some fitness in the
Is it
host.
possible that we extirpated its reservoir host?
Possibly, I guess.
We wouldn't do that. Would we?
Maybe not on purpose.
Ryan, it's been suggested now that we need to change the name from vaccination to equination.
That's right. Yes.
Is that
Jose
right?
Esparza has a paper out from last year where he basically, and he is probably the number one horsepox was the original ancestor kind of champion, and he believes that we should be calling it equination.
Good luck jockeying for that.
But Jenner thought he was working with a cow virus. I guess that's, not a virus at all, a cow something, right?
Yeah,
Right.
well, Jenner, so there is some work in his inquiry where he talks about, at one point in the first, I think, section of the inquiry, where he thinks it could have been from horses that then infected the farriers that were like
The grease.
Yeah,
Right.
the grease. So they transferred it kind of to the cows when the milking season was really busy, and
Farms are dirty.
Exactly. So
When you were planning these experiments, did you have any pushback at any level, local biosafety committee, funding agencies, and so forth?
So all the funding for this work came from Tonix Pharmaceuticals. So they actually came to David for another reason. They were looking for licensing some of David's Dryvax clones that he has he identified in a paper a number of years ago, and so that part, I don't think we would probably have gotten a CIHR grant to do this. But when we went through all of the appropriate channels, David's he's on the WHO advisory board for virolovirus research, and on the biosafety board at the University of Alberta. And so we went through all of the appropriate channels that we knew of at the time to carry out the work. And it really wasn't until, I would say, later on, maybe, that there seemed to be, I guess, once you've done it, then people have problems with the fact that you did it. And then there was a little bit more pushback at the end, but when we were trying to publish it.
For sure, after it was published, you got a lot of press.
We got a lot of press before it was published.
Before as well, yeah.
There were two journal articles in Health Security on horsepox that came out before our paper even was in press.
Because we know afterwards in the U.S. there were claims that you were enabling similar work with smallpox virus.
That's right. I think a lot of people thought that we were providing a blueprint for scientists to assemble variola. And David and I think that that's kind of, we're not giving enough credit to the scientists. Like this procedure has been known for a very long time. As I said to this morning in my talk, Frank Fenner, he showed in 1959 that you could reactivate a heat-inactivated pox virus. And David had shown in 2003, and there's a number of other groups using different pox virus helper viruses that showed that you could do this. So in the pox virus field, it wasn't a surprise. And I would say in most of the scientific field, it wasn't a surprise. It seemed to be more in health policy.
So in patenting terms, this would not meet the standard of being non-obvious.
Yeah.
This was something that somebody who was an expert in the field could have thought how to do.
Yeah.
Were you surprised that the sequence that you got, you said there's one sequence in GenBank, that it actually worked?
I was very surprised because we had no idea if there were mutations, and we didn't even have the whole sequence.
Sequencing errors, right?
Yeah, it happened, I think in 2006, I think is when the paper came out. So we were, we kind of advised Tonix that this, I referred to it as a Hail Mary approach almost. Mm-hmm. Like the day I saw, fluorescent virus under the microscope,
what were your words?
Holy, yeah.
Holy horse.
Yeah, holy horse.
How long did it take you to get to that point?
So it took us, I guess we started, so what I will tell you is you can't just call up like GeneArt, who made the clones for us, and the next week they send them in the mail. It took them a long time to build the clones. They came in spurts, so we got them not all at once. So luckily I got to play with them a bit as we were going, and that helped with the optimization, because we had to figure out a way to get these 32 kb fragments, and some of them were a bit smaller, but still 9 of them into a cell that was infected with the virus. And so I would say from the time we got the first fragment is probably about 6 to 10 months of optimization. And then it was a few times once we'd really optimized the transfection protocol and how much virus to use. It was only a few more times after that we really had to do before it worked.
Now you mentioned in your talk that since you can reconstruct a pox virus from a sequence using this procedure and get an accurate output, this is another argument for getting rid of the remaining variola stocks.
That's right. I don't know I think there's always two camps. And I'm not sure if we sequenced all of the variola virus strains, but I know definitely like CDC and Vector have sequenced them. They just might not be in the database, all of them. But yeah, there's in my opinion, for what that matters, I don't see any reason why we would need to focus in keeping them locked up at Vector and CDC anymore. But there are, both the CDC and Vector and the WHO reports that they have, there are people still actively investigating vaccines and antivirals against smallpox.
Sure. Of course, then there are stocks that we don't know about.
Yes.
Yeah. Unknown knowns, I guess that would be.
Yeah, known unknowns.
Known unknowns.
Yeah.
Right. I think it's amazing that you can synthesize 32,000 bases? Was that the biggest
That was
one?
the biggest one.
Because when I started with oligos 30 years ago, you could make a 30-mer for thousands of dollars, right? You remember, some of you? Some of you must. And I'm just astonished. What does it cost for a 32,000 base oligo?
It's about $15,000. So it's 50 cents a base. So that was kind of, it's definitely cheaper to make smaller fragments. So there's a lot more, definitely a lot more quality control that has to be done.
I have to say that we are trying to get a clone, a viral DNA clone from someone, and they're just delaying and delaying. We're just going to have it ordered. For coronaviruses, it's 7,000 bases.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, you should just make it.
It's just things that you used to spend your whole life on. Now, in the paper, you suggested that maybe this could be a replacement for the current smallpox vaccine. It might have better safety profiles. Is that going to happen, you think?
It's not definitely our interest in the lab. I think that's definitely Tonix's interest in the lab in pushing that forward as another option for maybe not just smallpox, but monkeypox. As I mentioned today, there's been outbreaks of monkeypox, and there aren't really good vaccines for that. I know that I went to a poxvirus meeting a couple of weeks ago, and the CDC is doing an MVA, so an MVA vaccination for monkeypox. They're doing a clinical trial there. But yeah, there are other diseases that we could use them or treat.
And of course, it would be tough to test efficacy for any new.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is the case for polio vaccines now, where many people are developing new ones for the post-eradication, but you can't test them, so you have to go on some faith that certain parameters tell you.
Right, you'd go in the case of probably either polio or smallpox, you'd go with antibody titers.
Yeah, profiles of antibodies, et cetera. Are you working with this virus at the moment in the lab?
I am not. We are doing a little bit more biology, trying to kind of figure, as I talked about the hairpin ends, like we're really interested in the basic biology as well, and why does it have a small plaque phenotype, and yet none of the genes that are involved in virus spread seem to be affected. But there are people in the lab that are working on other aspects of it.
Okay. So what's next for you? Are you going to stick around Edmonton for a while?
Yeah, I'm sticking around in Edmonton for now. David has a couple of projects that are really interesting that we're pursuing, looking at kind of gene capturing of like how do pox viruses get their immunomodulatory genes. And so we have some studies where we're looking at gene capturing events and trying to figure out if there's like areas, hot spots in the genome that they like to take up different genes, because it does seem, at least in the way that the genome is organized, that all of the kind of host virulence factors are at the ends. And so why is that? And is there a spot for that? So that's kind of the next step.
Would you like to strike out on your own at some point?
I think so. Right now I'm just seeing what's out there. There is not a ton of opportunity, but I did hear that there was a couple of options at this meeting, actually, for some potential faculty positions.
That's a good reason to have this kind of meeting in society, right?
Mm-hmm.
Tell me, before we finish, what is the origin of smallpox virus, in your opinion?
So I think, well, as I think I said it in my talk, they believe that it might have arose from camelpox. So it came kind of in Asia, and there was some event that happened.
Crossover from camels.
Yeah.
Gee, unique, huh?
Yeah, no, very neat. Well,
but it wasn't a camel virus. It was probably a rodent virus.
Yeah, probably.
Right. Anything more from you, Alan?
No, I think
all right. Thank you, Ryan. You can remain up here. You can help us throw out some T-shirts. So that's been an episode of TWiV. Usually we have more of us, and we do it over Skype. So we're fortunate to do it in front of an audience to show you what we like to do. This is all about educating people about what we do. 70% of our listeners tell us they are not scientists, and that's great. That's who we want to reach, right? And many of them are great fans. They write us a lot, and they tell us that we make science alive, and part of it is understanding who the people are that do the science. They think we're something special for some reason.
Right.
And we're not.
No, like Soylent, science is people.
Science is people. So where can you get TWiV? Let me tell you, most of you do already, but for those of you that don't, I found a few people at this meeting who had never heard of a podcast, period. So we have
it's called that because there was a device ages ago called an iPod.
That's right.
That it preceded the phones you now carry around.
So we have a website where we put all the episodes and all the links to references. It's microbe.tv/TWiV. But if you listen on your phone. If you have an iPhone, you have a program called, or an app called Podcasts. And on Android, it's something
Whether you
else.
wanted it or not, you have
It's
that.
there. And you can just go in there and subscribe to TWiV, and you'll get every episode automatically. It's free. So you would really help us if you subscribe, because that brings our numbers up and allows us to get more funding and so forth. But Microbe.tv is actually where all the other podcasts we do are housed. We do others. We do microbiology, This Week in Microbiology, This Week in Parasitism, This Week in Evolution, and Immune is our latest. You can find them all there, as well as on your iPhone or Android device. And we typically invite questions and comments from our listeners. TWiV at microbe.tv. If there's something you'd like to ask, just write that. And if you really love us, consider supporting us financially. You can go to microbe.tv/contribute. We have a number of ways you can help out, including Patreon, where you would give like $1 a month. And if everyone who listened did that, we would be able to do more shows like this on the road. We'd be able to make more podcasts, which we always have lots of ideas for. This is one of the steps on our summer tour, actually. I was just in Atlanta for the ASM meeting, and before that in the Netherlands. In a couple of weeks, we're going to be at Texas A&M University. We're going to be at the University of Texas, Austin for number 500 ASV meeting, double-stranded RNA virus meeting in September. You can find out our tour at microbe.tv/tour. And one of these days, we're going to make a tour shirt.
Yes.
With all the things on the back, right? All right, our guests today have been from Dalhousie University, Craig McCormick. From the University of Montreal, Nathalie Grandvaux. From Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, Kate O'Brien. And from the University of Alberta, Ryan Noyce. Thank you for coming. Alan Dove can be found at turbidplaque.com. He's on Twitter as Alan Dove. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure.
I'm Vincent Racaniello. You can find me at virology.ws. I want to thank the Canadian Society for Virology for having us here, particularly the organizers Craig McCormick and Nathalie Grandvaux. And I also want to thank ASM for their support of TWiV and Ronald Jenkins, who writes the music that you hear at the beginning. You can find his work at ronaldjenkins.com. And before I wrap up, let's give away some t-shirts. But nobody really wants one, right? One left. Who? That's it? All right. You've been listening to This Week in Virology. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back next week. Another TWiV is viral.